Hello and welcome to Miniature Adventures. I'm Big Lee, and this week I want to discuss slap chop. Is it a martial art or an innovative painting technique? So a few weeks ago I asked, are you a hobby hipster? And I'll try and put the link in up here somewhere in case you missed it. And I mentioned different developments and new techniques that have seemed to have revolutionised painting, and I briefly discussed contrast paints and something called zenithal highlighting, but I didn't go into a lot of detail at the time. Now I've recently watched a couple of videos that seem to suggest a new technique has come onto the field called slap chop. And until now I thought slap chop was a style of martial art, but apparently it's also a way of pre-highlighting models prior to the application of contrast paints. But is it just another fad, or an old technique rehashed and renamed for a new generation of painters? So what is slap chop? Simply described, it is a heavily applied pale grey or white dry brush over a black primer to accentuate the highlights and shadows recesses of a model. The result is a high contrast base coat that then accentuates the natural properties of contrast paints to produce a level of graduation or highlighting that would takes a fraction of the time of more conventional methods, shall we say. And as with other techniques, the results depend entirely on how much time you want to put into the preparation, but I've seen some really stunning results with this fairly simple method. Now my impression, having viewed several of these videos, is that it is a very similar method to zenithal highlighting, but it's done with a brush rather than with airbrushing, but making better use of contrast paints for a very fast result. Now this isn't the right forum for a tutorial video, and besides there are already plenty of really good examples on YouTube. I would highly recommend taking some time to seek them out if you haven't done so already. Now some of the examples of finished models that I've seen online are quite amazing, to be honest. However, it has to be said that I haven't seen any historical figures done this way yet, but I'm sure it's just a matter of time. Maybe I just haven't looked far hard enough. But here we get to the bit where I say, is it controversial? Now I learned of this method because I accidentally stumbled across a video that implied that the name itself was some great controversy. Certainly from the videos that I've watched, it is clear that the method has divided opinion, shall we say, in the Warhammer / Wargaming community. Some seem to suggest the method is as old as the hills and giving it a new name is disingenuous. Others are less bothered by what it's called, but really take issue with the divergence from more traditional painting methods. In essence, from what I can tell, the controversy, if you can call it that, seems to be between the painters who feel it reduces the quality and the skill and the craft of painting, and the competition gamers who love it because they need to build and paint armies quickly to stay ahead of the latest battle-winning release from Games Workshop. As I'm neither an expert painter nor a competition gamer, and I don't play any Games Workshop games, I don't really have at the same visceral reaction that some others have had. I'm more interested in the question of whether the technique has any utility to the small-scale historical wargamer such as myself. So am I going to use this technique? Will I be giving it a try? Well, as I think I've mentioned before, I think the use of contrast paints and their many rivals and spin-offs is an interesting new product for all painters. You know, I've been slowly gathering a collection of Games Workshop contrast paints, and I expect I'll be trying some of the alternative makes as well. That's a subtle hint to the wife to look in my Amazon wishlist. I'm still very much at the experimenting to see what I can do with these stage. And as you may have seen from some of my previous figures, I have used them on 15mm figures. I've never used contrast paints on 6mm figures. I'm not entirely sure that the utility for that scale. Now, while I'm unsure of the full utility, as I say, of contrast paints and the slap chop technique on a 6mm figure in particular, I could be wrong. So the next step for me is to try the technique on a few figures of various scales before I make any radical changes to my established painting process. Time permitting, I will try and report back on how I get on with this in the coming weeks. So as usual, I'm going to throw this subject out to you. Have you encountered the slap chop method, if you want to call it that, and have you given it a go on historical figures? Is it the revolution that some online are suggesting, or is it old hat and there are no genuinely new ideas under the sun? If you've given it a go, what scales have you used it on and how successful were your efforts? I'd be particularly interested if you used it on 6mm figures, because obviously that's what I'm primarily working on over the next few months. And lastly, has it made a permanent change to the way you paint, or is it all just a gimmick by Games Workshop to sell more of their contrast paints? So as usual, please join the conversation in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe and share, and if you want to keep up to date with weekly content from this channel, please tap the bell notification icon. So until next week, stay safe, keep gaming, and of course, keep rolling high.